At the wedding venue, Sarah greeted her with open arms, glowing in anticipation. "Vivian, you've outdone yourself. It's perfect." Vivian smiled genuinely. "You deserve nothing less." Her gaze drifted to the end of the hall where Frank stood, talking to the officiant. For a brief second, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, everything they never said passed between them. This time, Vivian looked away first. Guests filled the hall, laughter echoing, camera flashes glittering. Vivian stood quietly at the back, pretending to adjust decorations, but her eyes stayed on the aisle. Sarah, radiant in her gown, held her father's arm, ready to walk toward her future. Frank stood at the altar, fidgeting slightly, his eyes restless. The music began. Sarah took her first step, smiling. But Frank's expression grew tense, as if the air itself was pressing against his chest. Vivian watched, breath caught in her throat. When Sarah reached him, Frank's voice faltered as he took her hand. "You look beautiful," he managed. The officiant began to speak, but Frank's hands trembled. Vivian saw it. The guilt, the hesitation. Her heart pounded as if she already knew something was about to happen. When the officiant said, "Do you, Frank Collins, take Sarah Williams?" Frank froze. Silence swallowed the hall. Frank's voice broke the silence. "I can't do this." Gasps filled the hall. Sarah blinked, confused. "Frank, what are you saying?" He turned to her, voice shaking. "I can't marry you without being honest. I've been living a lie. I was engaged before I went abroad, to someone I wronged deeply." Whispers spread like wildfire. Vivian's heart dropped. Sarah's face crumpled. "Frank, what are you doing?" Frank turned toward the crowd. His eyes found Vivian at the back of the hall. "I left her. I left the woman who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And I've hated myself every day since." Every head turned toward Vivian. She stood frozen, the entire hall staring. Sarah followed his gaze and finally understood. Her voice cracked. "Vivian? You?" Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she stumbled backward. "You both lied to me." Vivian shook her head. "No, Sarah, I didn't. I swear I didn't know until I saw his picture." But Sarah couldn't hear it. The sound of her sobs drowned everything. The wedding fell apart in chaos. Guests whispered, cameras flashed, and reporters swarmed outside. Vivian stood in the corner, trembling. This was her nightmare come to life. Humiliation, again. Sarah's father stormed out, furious. Sarah herself ran into the dressing room, tearing off the veil. Frank tried to follow, but Vivian stopped him. "Don't," she said firmly. "You've done enough damage." He looked at her, broken. "I never meant for this to happen." Vivian's eyes glistened. "Neither did I, but you don't fix your mistakes by ruining more lives." The rain began to pour outside as if the sky itself grieved. Vivian picked up the fallen bouquet from the floor and handed it to a crying Sarah. "You don't deserve this pain," she said softly. Sarah's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell me, Vivian?" Tears rolled down Vivian's cheeks. "Because I wanted your happiness more than my closure." Hours later, the venue was empty. Vivian sat alone in the bridal room, the discarded gown draped over a chair. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Frank entered quietly, his suit drenched. "Vivian." She didn't look up. "You destroyed 2 women in one lifetime, Frank. That must be a record." He stepped closer. "I thought coming back would make things right." Vivian stood, finally meeting his eyes. "No, you came back to ease your guilt, not to make peace." He reached for her hand. She stepped back. "Don't. I don't hate you anymore, Frank. But that doesn't mean I want you back." He swallowed hard, tears forming. "I'm sorry." Vivian nodded. "I believe you. But your sorry doesn't rebuild what you burned." As he left, she looked at the gown one last time. The one she'd made for another woman, the one that carried every scar of her past. Then she whispered, "Maybe this is what healing looks like. Standing in the ruins and choosing to walk away." The night after the wedding, silence filled Vivian's apartment. The only sound came from the ticking clock and the soft hum of city lights outside her window. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes red, lips trembling, the weight of the day pressing on her chest. She replayed everything: Frank's confession, Sarah's tears, the whispers of the guests. Yet what haunted her most wasn't anger, but the painful truth that she no longer felt broken. For years, she imagined this confrontation, the apology, the closure, but when it came, she realized she'd already outgrown the pain. She wasn't the same girl who waited by a church door. She is a woman who built an empire from the ashes of that moment. As the rain finally stopped, Vivian stood, walked to her sewing table, and unfolded the unfinished version of her own wedding gown, the one she never wore. She ran her fingers across the fabric, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You didn't win, Frank. I did." For the first time in years, she slept peacefully. Days turned into weeks. The scandal from the wedding spread, but Vivian refused to entertain gossip. Instead, she poured her energy back into her fashion house, designing, teaching, and creating beauty again. Her staff admired her resilience. They whispered about how calm she seemed, how her work somehow grew even more powerful, carrying a new emotional depth. One afternoon, a teenage girl came to her studio with her mother. The girl had burns on her arms and asked shyly if Vivian could make her a dress for her prom that would make her feel normal again. Vivian knelt beside her, smiled gently and said, "You're already more than normal. You're brave." That night, as she sewed, Vivian realized she was stitching something beyond fabric. She was mending her own heart through others. A month later, a popular fashion magazine contacted her for a feature titled, "Women Who Rose from the Ruins." They wanted her story, how she built her brand, her heartbreak, her comeback. Vivian hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to open that wound again, but something inside whispered that her story might help someone else heal too. During the interview, she didn't paint herself as a victim. She spoke softly, saying, "Sometimes life doesn't give us closure in the way we expect. But if you keep walking, one day, you'll realize you've already closed the chapter yourself." When the article came out, it went viral. Messages poured in, from women who'd been left, betrayed, or forgotten, thanking her for reminding them they could still bloom. Vivian read every one of them, tears in her eyes. For the first time, her pain had a purpose. Weeks later, she received a message. It was from Frank. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said, "I saw the article. You've become everything I once dreamed of being. I'm proud of you." Vivian stared at the message for a long time. Once, those words would have made her ache. Now, they only brought peace. She typed back slowly, "Thank you, Frank. I hope you find peace too." And she meant it. That night, she stood on her apartment balcony, wind in her hair, city lights glowing like stars below. She felt light, as though she had finally let go of the last thread that tied her to the past. Months later, Vivian received a call from an event curator named Daniel, inviting her to collaborate on a charity fashion gala for orphaned girls learning to sew. When they met, Daniel was nothing like Frank. He was calm, soft-spoken, with the kind of eyes that listened. He spoke passionately about giving young girls a voice through fashion. As they talked, Vivian noticed something she hadn't felt in years: ease. He didn't pity her. He admired her strength. When he said, "Your story changed my sister's life. She read about you," Vivian felt her heart swell. Maybe the universe had sent someone not to fix her, but to remind her she was already whole. The gala project became a turning point. Vivian spent hours teaching young girls how to sew, showing them how fabric, thread, and patience could turn pain into beauty. Each day, Daniel stopped by, sometimes helping with decorations, sometimes just listening. One evening, after the others left, they sat together surrounded by half-finished gowns. Daniel said softly, "You don't talk much about the past." Vivian looked at the sewing machine before replying, "Because I finally learned not to live there." He smiled. "Then I'm glad I met you in your present." Vivian laughed. A soft, real laugh that filled the room like music. Just as her life began to settle, an invitation arrived. Frank and Sarah's vow renewal ceremony. Vivian froze as she read it. Attached was a handwritten note from Sarah. "You gave me the most beautiful gown, even after what you went through. I owe my courage to you. I want you there, as the woman who inspired me to forgive too." Vivian held the card for a long time. Her fingers trembled, but her heart didn't race. There was no bitterness left, just quiet acceptance. Later that night, Daniel found her sitting by the window. She handed him the card, and he simply said, "You don't owe them anything." Vivian smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I owe myself peace." On the day of the vow renewal, Vivian attended, not as a designer or ex-fiancée, but as a woman who had finally made peace with her past. Sarah looked radiant in a simple, elegant gown, one Vivian helped her redesign after the wedding disaster. Frank greeted her with a nod of quiet respect. When the couple exchanged vows, Vivian didn't feel pain. She felt gratitude for how far she'd come. After the ceremony, Daniel took her hand gently and whispered, "You've come full circle." Vivian smiled, looking toward the horizon. "No," she said softly. "I've just started a new one." And as she walked away, sunlight filtered through the clouds, soft, golden and endless. The days after the vow renewal felt different, lighter. Vivian had faced her past and survived it without bitterness. The ache she once feared had become a quiet memory, no longer sharp, no longer defining. Daniel became a constant presence, not intrusive, just there. They never rushed anything. Their connection grew slowly, built on kindness and shared silence. Months later, the charity gala finally arrived. The young girls Vivian had mentored showcased their handmade dresses on stage, each one imperfect but beautiful, shimmering with hope. Vivian watched from the side, tears in her eyes. Daniel sat beside her, whispering, "They're your legacy, you know." When the final model walked the runway, the crowd rose in applause. The moment mirrored Vivian's own journey, each dress telling a story of pain transformed into beauty. Then Daniel walked on stage, holding a microphone. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate the woman who taught us that broken things can still shine." The crowd turned toward Vivian, cheering. She blushed, covering her mouth in disbelief. In that instant, she felt more seen than ever before, not as the woman left at the altar, but as the woman who rebuilt herself stitch by stitch. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Vivian grew closer, not through grand gestures, but through moments that felt real. Cooking dinner together, watching the rain, laughing over burnt toast and mismatched fabrics. One night, as they closed the studio, Daniel placed his hand over hers. "You taught me that love isn't always loud," he said softly. "Sometimes it's the quiet that stays." Vivian looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen in years. Safety, not excitement or obsession. Just peace. And when he kissed her forehead, it wasn't a spark. It was a sunrise. Gentle, slow, and warm enough to melt every leftover shadow in her heart. It happened months later, on the anniversary of her fashion brand. Daniel had organized a small private dinner at the studio. Candles, fairy lights, and soft music playing in the background. On the mannequin beside them stood the wedding dress, now transformed once again into something breathtakingly new. Lighter, freer, designed not for heartbreak, but for rebirth. Daniel knelt down and said quietly, "You don't need saving, Vivian. You never did. I just want to walk beside you in whatever chapter comes next." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Yes, this time, It feels right. It wasn't the fairy tale she once dreamed of. It was better, real, grounded and earned. The morning sunlight streamed softly through the windows of Vivian's studio, now transformed into a wedding venue filled with flowers, laughter and friends. Vivian stood before the mirror one last time, wearing the same dress that had witnessed every stage of her life, redesigned, repurposed, reborn. As Daniel stood waiting, she smiled to herself. She wasn't walking toward completion. She was walking into continuation. When she reached him, Daniel whispered, "You look like every beginning I've ever hoped for." And when the music began, Vivian didn't think about the past. She thought about the girl she used to be, sewing by candlelight, dreaming of a love that would see her. Now she knew. The love she needed most had always been her own. As she danced in her wedding dress, the one she finally wore, the room glowed with something bigger than joy. It was peace. And in that peace, her story found its perfect ending. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Your support keeps the stories coming.